friends, and welcome to Ariel's Twilight Years, how to be a really old model. What shall we talk about today? Well, fortunately, I have just the subject. Last week, I saw an abomination on Twitter, and I'm not going to give the organisation extra publicity by naming them, but they exemplify a line of thinking that's worth addressing because I'm seeing it a lot at the moment. It took the form of a thread of quite accusatory tweets calling on sex workers to stand up for civilian women by modifying our professional practices. So let's have a look at them. How sex workers can support civilian women. 1. Stop making content that sexualises rape, paedophilia, incest, misogyny or racism. This is normalising and reinforcing harmful stereotypes which contribute to civilian women's abuse. 2. Insist that your regular clients disclose to any woman in their life that they use your services. The culture of silence from sex workers is unfair to other women as they are being robbed of their choice not to participate in a non-monogamous relationship. 3. Stop lobbying against legal protections for women who were involuntarily coerced into participating in sex work because you may personally lose money. Please support and prioritise the safety of women and children first over the expansion of the industry. 5. If you want to talk about your profession publicly, please fully disclose the hazards of the job as well as acknowledging when your privilege affords you atypical opportunities. Help civilian women considering sex work make a fully informed choice. 6. Finally, remember that supporting women is a two-way street. The expansion of the sex industry harms many more people than it helps. So those of you who manage to build a successful platform, be sure to centre marginalised women in conversation with your clients. Initially, it was the accusatory tone that I noticed rather than the subject matter. The headmistressy insistent that it's a sex worker's responsibility to know whether her client's in a relationship or not. It's his responsibility to know, it's not hers. The idea that by lobbying to protect our own safety and ability to work in our own legal businesses, we're making coerced women more vulnerable to sex trafficking. The offensive suggestion that we dox or out a woman for speaking of her negative experiences of our industry, when by and large sex workers are extremely careful about privacy and used to being protective of people's identities because, we'd like that courtesy extended to us. Finally, the idea that if our experience of the industry has been good, we shouldn't talk about that without also discussing the hazards of the job. Given that for those of us who work online, the hazards have been all but eliminated, that struck me as especially peculiar. It's worth pointing out at this juncture that most professional models and content creators, myself included, don't have any experience of sex trafficking, even as witnesses to the practice. I can't talk with any authority about it because my entire career has been spent working voluntarily with people who only hire consenting adults. This conflation of sex work and sex trafficking is exhausting, both in its hysteria and its inaccuracy. I have never once suspected in my 17 years of modelling that any of my hundreds of fellow performers have been at shoots against their will. We turn up to work on our own, in our own vehicles, and get paid into our own bank accounts. I am not talking about victims of trafficking here, because I've never met one, and I doubt that I've ever met anyone who exploits them either. I don't think that the people who abuse women on camera for profit also hire professional models at $600 a day. My clients are not sex traffickers. But anyway, I digress. Back to the mad, radical feminist, sex work hating Twitter thread. Having thought through their words a little, I realised that my insulted reaction was because, as it happens, the issues they mention are all ones that I've thought through by myself already and acted on accordingly. I don't dox anyone, even if they've perpetuated an actual crime against me. I make videos about bad experiences to help other models avoid them. I provide free support to any model who contacts me and give as much help as possible to new models. I turn down work if I'm worried about its message, among a million other reasons, and I cease working for anyone who tells me he has a partner who doesn't know he's doing model photography. But that's just me. Maybe I'm the only ethical sex worker in the entire game. Well done to the one ethical slut in the whole world. That's me. Well done, me. Of course, I am not. I know that because I'm a veteran of this industry and I've met many hundreds of models and thousands of photographers. Most of us are not even slightly ethically lacking. But since you might not take my word for it because I'm a pornographer, I asked some of my friends and colleagues about professional choices they've made for ethical reasons. So let's have a look at them. These people work across diverse genres with widely varied levels of commercial success. Our opinions aren't identical, some of us shoot things other people wouldn't want to, and we reach different conclusions about best practice. You might not agree with every conclusion that we reach. However, this series of messages paints a picture that's completely different from the sadly prevalent attitude that everyone in the sex industry prioritises money over everything else and has no morals. On the contrary, respect for ourselves, our families, our clients, peers, and our wider audience informs our business choices. Just as you'd expect if you aren't hell-bent on believing that we're all gleefully in the process of selling ourselves to mammon, while simultaneously so poverty-stricken we can't afford to turn down business that we don't want. I'm going to talk you through my own 11 rules for ethical behaviour, starting with the ones that relate to my responsibility to myself, then to my clients, then my peers, then my audience, then society, and of course some of them are a mixture. So, for myself, I turn down work that actively turns me off or makes me unhappy, and I write descriptions that I feel are respectful to myself and my body. For example, I don't call myself a MILF unless it's relevant to the storyline, because I don't want to be valued or sexualised primarily for my age, and I don't want to contribute to a culture that does this to other performers. I also try to describe my performance rather than my body. For my clients, too. I protect the privacy of my clients, even if we stop working together or have a serious argument. I'll talk about their behaviour without identifying them if I think it will help other models, and I'll share their professional brand name privately with models if I think they represent an actual risk to us. But the only way I'll share their actual name is if I go to the police. 3. If someone's behaviour begins to indicate an obsession with me, I cut off their access to me as completely as possible, irrespective of how much future income I'll lose out on as a result. If they're not capable of moving on by themselves, I'll do everything I can to help them move on. That's better for me too, of course, because I don't want to have stalkers, but I also want to make sure that people's enjoyment of my work stays healthy and proportionate. 4. I charge everyone the same, and when I hire people, I pay them all the same, irrespective of whether they're male or female and behind the camera or in front of the camera. I want to make sure everyone feels equally valued and respected, even if I earn less or pay more as a result. Of course, it gets easier to do this the more successful you are. For my peers, 5. I talk about things that I think are wrong with the industry and about bad experiences I've had. It's tempting to feel pressurised to put on a brave face about everything when you work in an industry that some people demonise. But the only way to help models coming into the industry after me to have the best experience possible is to be honest about pitfalls and hazards and to give truthful references about photographers. 6. I don't allow bad behaviour from custom clients or photographers. I cease working with them and I explain why. Because the client who's high-handed or pervy or predatory or unsafe with me today may do the same thing to a more vulnerable model tomorrow, and I want to make sure he doesn't do that in ignorance. 7. I don't mess with other girls' money. I'm careful how I speak of other models to photographers, and unless I think there's a serious, valid reason why they shouldn't work together, I don't say anything negative if asked my opinion. If I have genuine concerns, I'll try to give balanced critique, whether of a model or a client. I try to give examples of how to make the shoot as successful as possible, rather than saying anything that might stop them working together. For example, if someone's habitually late, I might advise that the client emphasises the importance of starting on time, rather than telling them, oh, she's always late, so don't book her. Or he doesn't stop for lunch, so make sure you take plenty of snacks, rather than he's horrible and doesn't even let you have lunch. And I always try to mention positives unless someone has literally assaulted me. For society, 8. I don't work with people whose partners don't know they're hiring me. On a first shoot, this might not be immediately obvious, but if a photographer tells me that his wife doesn't know he photographs models, I don't take further bookings with him. If a shoot is going to involve any kind of sexual contact, like spanking, I also specifically ask whether the photographer's partner has consented to him doing that with me. I don't want to be anyone's means for cheating on their partner, whatever that cheating might entail. 9. I don't shoot stuff if I'm worried about its effect on people who see it. For example, I assume that the people who view my fetish work will know that what they're watching isn't real, but I consider the possibility that someone with a poor grasp of reality might also see it. If someone thinks my spanking work is a how-to video for settling disputes, for example, the worst that could happen is he might try to spank someone who didn't consent, which would be awful, but they'd survive it. But I don't shoot anything where I appear to get killed or to kill anyone, because if by some awful twist of fate someone who wasn't sane watched it and tried to emulate it, the worst that could happen is that someone could be killed, which seems extremely unlikely, but for me it's a boundary I've realised I just don't want to cross. Similarly, although I shoot bondage work that is only safe if you have the right skills and have taken the correct precautions, I don't shoot anything that can't be done safely, in my opinion. Additionally, when I shoot BDSM work, I always make sure I highly publicise the fact that I was enjoying myself, just to decrease the chance that anyone will believe that I'm under duress and that in some way that's an acceptable thing to do to a woman or to anyone. 10. I don't shoot anything sexual or naked in public or in places where there's a reasonable chance of being seen by witnesses who didn't consent and who might be distressed by what they see. I want the people who see my work to have chosen to see it, and for the same reason I don't put trailers of my work up on tube sites that don't have a content warning on the landing page. 11. I'm honest about my physical and sexual limitations. I do not want to be responsible to any degree for making any men who viewed my work believe that their girlfriends are rubbish for not being able to orgasm in 2 minutes or for not being able to stay tied up for an hour. If shooting gets too painful to continue, I explain on screen why I'm changing position. If I'm trying to have an orgasm and it's not working, I'm honest about that too. I don't want to contribute to making anyone feel as though their partner is defective or that they are defective. Now, possibly this all makes me sound quite joyless and strict, but these are the sort of considerations I've discussed with other models throughout my career, and I know that by no means am I the only person to have come up with similar boundaries. Of course, there's no consensus because we don't have a union making the rules for us. But I hope that by talking you through some of my guidelines, you'll appreciate that I'm only one of many performers and producers who have priorities other than maximum income. Of course though, it's easier to have more boundaries the more financially secure you are. So to the sort of people who belong to the unnamed organisation tweeting this sort of sex work shaming nonsense, I'd encourage them to consider the fact that if you can't afford next month's rent and you don't have any other ways to immediately make an income, you probably can't afford to turn down a client because you think he might be married. That is somewhat of a luxury. If you're actually concerned about sex workers and want us all to be in a position where we can afford ethical scruples, the best thing you can do is to refuse to contribute further to the stigmatisation of sex work. The other thing you can do is to pay for your porn rather than frequenting tube sites. When we have adequate income from being fairly paid for our labour, we can afford to turn down work we have ethical concerns over. So perhaps, before demanding that sex workers make choices that make your life easier, demand better choices from yourself to make everyone's life easier. I donate to Pineapple Support, which is an organisation giving free and subsidised mental health care to people in the sex industry, because it's my belief that when you're in a good place mentally and emotionally, you're more likely to respect yourself and other people when you make choices at work and at home. If you're concerned about sex workers, I encourage you to do the same. Thank you for listening, everybody. Please comment, like, subscribe. I reply to all the comments that I can, and if you are a model needing help and advice, just email me on the email below and I will get right back to you. Thanks as always, I'm Ariel and these are my Twilight Years.